So, Doom Eternal then. Fucking hell. That should be the tagline, in fact. Not Doom Eternal, but Doom fucking hell. Both for the brain-melting intensity of it and the fact that Doomguy is literally on a mission to fuck hell right up, and nobody's going to stop him. There's a few things I want to say about this game, but let me start by saying that it is very, very good. A masterfully constructed action game that gamers will be playing and discussing for years, and rightfully so. It's worth any gamer's time. With that being said, let's double jump deeper into this demonic demon hole, instead of rabbit hole, because there's no rabbits in hell. That would just be silly. Moving on. If Doom 2016 was a reinvention of the original Doom for the modern age of gaming, then Doom Eternal kind of does the same thing for Doom 2 Hell on Earth, given that both games tell the story of the forces of hell that were unleashed on Mars, making their way to Earth, with Doomguy hot on their heels, trying to put the invasion of our planet back in its box. But whereas the game engine tech of the early 90s could only depict Earth as a series of darkly coloured walls and floors, the new game is powered by id Tech 7, and what a difference that makes. The artists and designers at id have let their creativity run riot, and it looks glorious, stunning even. Sometimes I would take advantage of the game's few quiet moments to just look around in wonder. I beheld a lamentable sight, a scarred and desolate land devoid of happy life, with the inhabitants that remain a potentially mortal threat. Naturally, I am referring to Sheffield High Street during COVID lockdown, so I quickly left there and came home to play Doom instead. The game engine isn't just good for pretty pictures either. Doom Eternal plays like a dream. I've never encountered a AAA game with this level of graphical fidelity that plays this smoothly on day one of its release on mid-range hardware, not even previous id games. To be fair, id always does well, never less than good, when it comes to making sure its games run well on the PC, but the optimization of Doom Eternal is off the scale good. Rage ran pretty well, but it had issues with slow texture loading. Doom 2016 caused my 3-year-old graphics card at the time to buckle under the strain, which led me to upgrade to a GTX 1060, after which it was as smooth as you like. I fully expected to encounter the same issue again, which is why I actually brought a new graphics card to upgrade from the 1060, which is itself over 3 years old now. I didn't need to. The footage that you're watching is recorded using the 3.5-year-old 1060, with the footage recording at 1080p, but the game itself running at 1440p on ultra settings. As you can see, it is buttery smooth on what is now an aged mid-range card. Remarkable. So why does it play like this, and yet Shenmue 3, a much less graphically demanding game, barely gets to 30 frames a second at times, eh? It really gives the impression that id designed this game for the PC first and foremost, which is as it should be. And there's now no doubt in my mind that their build quality for this platform is market leading. The fact a game this graphically intensive runs so well at the point of release is almost as gobsmacking as the game itself, which is perhaps a sad indictment of much of the rest of the industry, which has become used to serving up games in unfinished states in recent years and then relying on day one patches to fix a host of issues. Needless to say, there are games that didn't play this well even several months after their release. Yes, Arkham Knight, I'm looking at you. It could be argued that this level of optimization is not just for show, but is in fact a necessity, given how frenetic the gameplay is. Perhaps there is some truth in that, for the gameplay certainly can get bonkers busy. The first level plays like an endgame level from Doom 2016, and it only gets more intense from there. As with the first game, surviving relies on near constant movement. The stroke of genius in Doom 2016 was the glory kill system, because it incentivized aggressive, close-up action. But it also meant that players who liked to hang back and pick shots from the safety of cover were not likely to survive for very long. This one reward system successfully upended a decade of shooter conventions, which had become dominated by the military stylings of Call of Duty and Battlefield, with their reliance on over-familiar duck and cover mechanics. Although intense, the action in those games now looks a bit staid and ungainly next to Doom's constant forward motion. Doom Eternal doesn't even have a duck button for crying out loud. Instead of crouch, the C key is used instead for chainsaw. Doom surely doesn't get any more Doom than that. As a continuation game, Doom Eternal was never going to have the same impact the first game had with its glory kills, so it attempts to make up for this by being more intense. A lot more intense. Often this succeeds really well, and there were times when I even laughed out loud at the sheer ludicrous excess of it all. But it can feel exhausting at times. As wonderfully crafted as it is, Doom Eternal is a full-on assault on the senses. It can make you feel ridiculously badass in a way few other shooters can match. But there are times when I found it to be a little bit too much, and this isn't helped by the multitude of new abilities, which can actually feel like a hindrance rather than a help. In the previous game, as well as your weapons and glory kills, you could lob a grenade. In Doom Eternal, you need to juggle 2 different grenades, the flamethrower, the blood punch, and the chainsaw, which has become another ability instead of a weapon that you select. Each ability has a specific function, and trying to remember to manage them all whilst half of hell is attempting to rip your face off is mostly fun, but can become wearisome if things aren't going your way. Essentially, there's a difficulty curve to mastering this game that goes well beyond just shooting demons, and it does not ease you in gently. Even on the standard, normal difficulty of Hurt Me Plenty, this game will be a challenge for most that will sometimes veer into the territory of outright frustration, particularly when this guy shows up. Fuck this guy. I hate the Marauder so much, and a little bit of online research confirmed that he is considered the most annoying and problematic enemy in the game. Fighting him is never pleasant, and when I killed him, I never felt satisfied that I'd beaten a difficult opponent, only relieved that the encounter was over. It's been a long time since I felt such rage at a video game fight. It reminded me, in fact, of Mortal Kombat boss fights that I used to lose again and again as a teenager, and becoming so angry that a passing stranger at the arcade asked me if I was okay once, whereupon I sheepishly said, "Yeah, I'm fine," and then slinked away shortly afterward with my tail between my legs. Fighting the Marauder brought back to me that dismal combination of blind rage followed by face-palming embarrassment once I realised what I was doing. And to be honest, I didn't really need that in my life again, especially now that I am 87 years old. So the short of it is that I preferred the difficulty curve of Doom 2016, which was certainly challenging at times, but never set off fits of shame-inducing rage, except for maybe the Spider Mastermind at the end. The exploration side of the game, or secret hunting, also compares unfavourably to the previous game, at least for me. And that's because my most successful videos were from the Collectibles guide that I made for Doom 2016, and I had originally intended to do the same thing for Doom Eternal. But, having now played the game through to completion, I now don't think I will, given how much more straightforward it has become to find all of the secrets. After a couple of basic map upgrades, all of the secrets are laid out for you, even without collecting the automap, and once you know where they are, it isn't difficult to figure out the route to get to them. So, as a collectibles hunter, this was a little disappointing. There are some nice touches with the collectibles, such as listening to the soundtracks from previous id games in your home base after you pick them up in the levels. It's nostalgia-inducing fun. And collecting the various toys unlocks the corresponding character models, which is kinda cool. Speaking of soundtracks, this also deserves a mention because Doom Eternals is outstanding. It's just so good. The composer Mick Gordon has again delivered the goods in top-notch fashion. Blowing away hordes of demons to heavy rock will never stop being fun, and it's difficult to imagine a better sonic accompaniment to the action. But having said that, my favourite piece is actually the slower, moodier ambient music in the second level of Exultia, which for some reason isn't part of the OST. The visual artists may have done a stellar job with the graphics, but it's the music here that really creates the atmosphere. Try playing this level without the music and you'll see what a difference it makes. There are horns, sounding like they are coming from some distant area, which helps create a sense of ancient imperial power of a mighty city once. There are soft, almost ghostly choral voices that emphasize the emptiness of this place, a reminder that this is no longer a mighty seat of power, but merely a cold, dead relic. And there are other vocals too, low, menacing voices that create a sense of the violence and hatred this place must have endured to be left in such a state. And finally, there is the single guitar note, so powerful it overrides everything and induces a feeling of pure dread, reminding you to always keep your guard up in this place, even when you can't see any enemies. Put all of these elements together and the result is just so epic. The sound editing is also generally excellent, well, mostly. The weapons are punchy and your enemies all have unique sounds that blend together really well during the action. But some of the sound effect choices are straight out of Looney Tunes, like the exaggerated popping sound when you remove a cacodemon's eyeball, or the gulp sound when you fire a grenade into its mouth. I just find it a bit distractingly silly, is all. It's like imagine firing a missile at a demon and then it lands with a clown car horn effect. You'd hear it and you'd be like, wait, was that a clown car horn they just threw in there? What the hell? Now I can actually understand that the developers maybe want to give things a bit more of a slapsticky air to them, considering how luridly violent the on-screen action is. However, when everything else about the game is made to look and sound so badass, to then have these comically exaggerated sound effects maybe take something away from that? I don't know, whatever. It's not that big a deal. The last thing I want to discuss is the narrative, sort of. Now, I'm not going to go into too much plot detail here, because at the time of writing this review, the game has only been out for around 3 weeks. Plus, my criticism is more with the storytelling rather than the story itself, so I don't think it's necessary to go into spoilers. But there will be some discussion of plot elements, so if you haven't played the game yet and you want to go in cold, consider this fair warning. The game's cinematics are all well done, there's some jaw-dropping set pieces, and quite a few amusing moments too.
Can I just say that it is an honor for me, personally, to meet you?
So far, so good. My main issue is that they've dialed up the backstory all the way to 11, so that Doom is now effectively a full space fantasy saga. complete with gods and monsters lording over all of us mere mortals, using titans and sentinels like interplanetary chess pieces to control whole worlds for their own dubious ends. It's a huge expansion of scope from any Doom game that has gone before it, and honestly, I'm not too sure how I feel about it. The thing that bothers me about it is that id games have tended to be more gameplay focused than story focused. Their main strengths are in creating slick, enjoyable gameplay systems to go with their astounding game engine technologies. Story was always a secondary concern, which is totally fine. Like I said in my Shenmue 3 review, you can make up for having weaker narratives with enjoyable gameplay, and that is true for both Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Both games are 100-mile-an-hour action games, and not only does that work really well, it's probably how Doom should be. Of course, you'd need to have some kind of story, if for no other reason than to connect one level to the next and give your character some kind of purpose for their actions. I would argue that Doom 2016 gets this balance about right, but Doom Eternal does not. Story in games needs to be given room to breathe, otherwise it won't blend with the gameplay and it will feel forced or tacked on. This is something that id has always had problems with. A common criticism of id, going back years, is that their games feel more like tech demos, whether or not you agree with that statement. With Doom Eternal, they're trying to cram in so much backstory, but without disrupting the game's flow, and to do that it falls back on the ancient, hackneyed technique of using collectible scrolls to explain the narrative in text form. This is the most straightforward and uncreative way of communicating your story in games, and if you take the time to actually stop and read all of the text, then you are disrupting the game's flow. And there's one level later in the game that has so many pages to collect that it actually starts to become a chore. We came to Doom to kill demons after all, not read about demons being killed in a different era. If you don't read the pages, then the narrative won't make a lot of sense, but the story isn't compelling enough to make all of that reading time really worth the effort. It's all a far cry from the opening of Doom 2016, which infamously began with what seemed to be an exposition dump, only for Doomguy to violently shove the narrative device aside halfway through. That felt like a deliberate punky act, as if the developers at id were making a statement that this was not going to be like every other modern action game that is cinematically driven and gameplay limited. Oh no, this was going to put gameplay first and foremost. Doom Eternal also puts gameplay first and foremost, but it also wants you to read a lot about the backstory they've created. By massively expanding the narrative scope in the follow-up, but doing it with clunky old diary entries essentially, Doom Eternal is in danger of becoming the very thing that Doom itself was mocking. This type of narrative exposition has actually been done by id before in Doom 3, and done better in that game. Because at least in Doom 3, the diary entries were recorded and you could listen to them. The recording started off professional, but as the game went on, became increasingly panicked and terrified and insane, which really helped make the atmosphere dark and scary in that game.
I'm shooting at shadows here, and every moment I feel them creeping closer toward me. Oh God, we should never have...
And it also made narrative sense for your character to stop and listen to the recordings in order to try and figure out what was going on. But the pages in Doom Eternal are just there. They don't contribute anything to the atmosphere, they don't add anything to the gameplay, they're just there for you to read as an optional extra. And it doesn't make any sense in this game for Doomguy to just stop his mission momentarily in order to read some encyclopedia pages. But that's just me. And maybe I'm wrong. It's just like my opinion, man. Whatever faults it has, Doom Eternal is still one of the best action games in years. The best action game since, well, the last one in fact. For me, Doom 2016 was a 5-star game, and Doom Eternal is a solid 4 stars. You should definitely go and play it. Even if you don't think your system can handle it, if it was built sometime in the last 5 years, I've no doubt that it can. Let me know what you thought of it, and whether or not you think a collectibles guide would actually be worth the effort. Thanks for watching!